Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. There's still a few people coming in from the waiting room, but I think we're going to get started now. It's about 3:19. I'm Tom Gabrielle. You probably saw me a few minutes ago during our presentation with our keynote speakers, Allison Fine and Beth Canther, talking about how artificial intelligence can help nonprofit organizations. We're delighted to have a tech expert panel now that will give a presentation, and I'm going to introduce Andrew Marietta, who is the VP of Regional Development for Nikon, who is going to serve as the moderator for this panel discussion. Andrew, please take it away.
Great, thank you, Tom, and thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. Before I have our two panelists introduce themselves, Kimberly Sandberg, who's our Tech Impact Digital Fundraising Instructor, and Chris Baranek, who's the Infrastructure and Security Consultant with Tech Impact. We just wanted to give the opportunity to share a little bit of information about Tech Impact itself, and just these slides we'll be forwarding to United Way so they can share them, because we do have some resources available here that we wanted everybody to have available. But before we have Kimberly and Chris more formally introduce themselves, Chris, do you mind just sharing a little bit about Tech Impact so people have a little more context? I think as we were discussing earlier, there's a lot of nonprofit organizations out there that are looking for information and resources, and Tech Impact is a great resource that I think some nonprofits aren't even aware of.
Thanks. So Tech Impact is a nonprofit managed service provider that only supports other nonprofits. And would you mind clicking onto the next screen? And so we have a variety of different services that we offer. So one, I did mention that we are a managed service provider. So we provide services like help desk functionality and assistance. We do project work where we do different kind of infrastructure upgrades, cloud migrations, that kind of stuff. We also have an education and training department that does a lot of education and outreach. And we also have another department, which is workforce development, and where we take, we do training transfer and get other people enrolled into our classes. And something that I'm proud to say that on the infrastructure team, we have at least 10 staff that we've hired through the workforce development program, which I think is just amazing. We have them on our help desk and on our infrastructure and project team, which I think is just great. So thanks for the opportunity to explain Tech Impact.
Yeah, and one thing I just flew through very quickly on our slides that I'll come back to at the end of our presentation is that Nikon has partnered with Tech Impact, and that's been possible through the Hudson Valley Funders Network. And there's some follow-up assistance that actually will be available that I'll just touch on the details on that when we wrap up. But we're excited to be able to provide that opportunity to nonprofits. And of course, there are some limitations based on your geographic location that I'll touch on. But it is an opportunity to have some follow-up resource or follow-up assistance through Tech Impact. So that's an exciting opportunity that we'll touch on. I want to move into our questions, and before we kind of jump right into trying to see have our panel weigh in on these questions that were pre-submitted to us. Kimberly, can you just give us a little background information on yourself, and then we'll have Chris give us some background information on just his general introduction, and then we'll jump right into the questions.
Yes, absolutely. My name is Kimberly Sandberg. I work with Tech Impact as a digital fundraising, kind of digital communications more broadly instructor. And I've worked at a number of nonprofits over the years, and digital fundraising communications is really my passion. So I'm really excited to answer the questions that were submitted and any questions that come up today about digital fundraising.
And my name is Chris Baranek. I'm the manager of the security team at Tech Impact. Some of the things that we do are security risk assessments, where we take a look at the overall security of clients. We also do stuff like Office 365 compliance, where we take a look at, well, now that your data is in Office 365, what kind of data is in there and what kind of regulations might you be must adhere to, and a variety of server hardening type projects. So pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chris and Kimberly. So we thought we would start with Kimberly with our digital fundraising questions. And this seems to be a very hot topic these days, especially since everything is pushed to virtual. And so I think, Kimberly, if we could start with our first question there, what are the best and most effective methods of digital fundraising? It's a very broad question, but what are your thoughts on that question regarding what are the most what are the most effective ways to raise funds digitally?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. It is pretty broad. The short answer is it kind of depends on a number of factors, including things like the size of your email list, your social media following, your website traffic, your budget, the roles in your organization, your capacity for managing a bigger digital fundraising program. How well known your organization is can also impact that too if you're trying to raise money online. But with all of that said, without knowing kind of that specific information, I'd say start with your donation page, because if your donation page isn't optimized, a lot of people will land there and will leave without donating. So that means you want to have, for example, as few fields as possible. So I've seen organizations who have, employer information and fax number and things like that still on their donation forms. You really don't want to do that. You really just need things like first and last name, email address, phone number, and address, because the longer the form is, the more likely somebody's going to click away without filling it out. And even if you have a lot of fields that aren't required in addition to your required fields, that can be overwhelming for somebody. And they may click away and say, oh, I'll come back to this later. Or they might just say, I don't want to mess with something that's quite so long. I don't have time for that. So just make sure it's as short as possible. You also want to make sure it's responsive on mobile. And what that means is it looks good on your phone and it's laid out for your phone or for your tablet, if that's the device you're looking at it on. So you don't want people to have to, zoom in or zoom out to try to see the whole form. You want it to be responsive and to be really nicely laid out on your phone as well as your desktop or your laptop. So you can check that by pulling up your donation page on your phone and see what it looks like. You can also include on your donation page a photo and maybe a brief story or a quote or a testimonial. And when I say brief, I mean a couple of sentences. You don't want to have too much text there. And you can include things like your tax deductible donation information or contact information. And then you want to start thinking really about how you get people there to your donation page. So you can send fundraising emails. And again, if you do that, you want to make sure your email is really optimized to drive people to your donation page. You want to tell a story. You want to only include one call to action, which is donate. And you can include that call to action multiple times throughout the email, but you don't, for example, want to send out a fundraising email that says, donate to this campaign or come to this event or learn more about this program, and link to all of those different things, because that will make your email less effective. And again, compelling photos are really effective across all digital fundraising channels, and including email. And you can look at some different fundraising emails, I would say, from other organizations to get some ideas. But you can bold certain text and hyperlink text, and also include donate buttons to really make your email stand out and be effective. And finally, you can also fundraise on social media. And I would say maybe focus on email first. If you have a decent sized email list, that can be a good place to start, and then expand to social media if you have a social media following or you want to reach a different audience. And you can use both organic posts, and you can also get into paid advertising, and so that more people see your posts on social media, and also fundraise directly on Facebook, for example, through Facebook fundraisers, if you apply for Facebook's fundraising tools. So there's a lot. I could talk about this for 3 hours probably, but that's kind of my high level overview with where I would get started with digital fundraising.
And I think we have a couple resources that we outlined in the slides here that that Kimberly can touch on as well as we wrap up. So we'll come back to a couple of more of the digital fundraising questions, but if we could just switch over to cybersecurity, and Chris, have you kind of talk about this question related to protecting against cyber attacks on CRM systems. And it kind of directly correlates with that whole issue of digital fundraising. I think a lot of organizations are worried about, that donor securities and general breaches, and how do organizations best protect and manage that risk from cyber attacks?
Thanks. So protecting a CRM system from cyber attacks isn't fundamentally different how you would protect any other information assets from cyber security attacks. And what I mean by that is the fundamentals of identity security. So identity security can be explained by ensuring that people are who they say they are and generally only have access to the resources that they need, and then it's always possible to know who is accessing what. And another way to think about this is the AAA framework, and specifically authentication, authorization, and accounting. And so with authentication is the process of confirming that someone is who they are or who they claim to be. And password is one form of authentication. So to protect a CRM system, you really want to make sure that you are requiring complex passwords for all accounts. But also, in addition to that, authentication mechanisms that only require a password are very easy to compromise. So authentication mechanisms which require a device or something you have improves the security of authentications. So, and that another, the technical process for that is multi-factor authentication. And so you might see this when you go into your bank and you go to sign in and you get a code or a call sent to your mobile device. That's how you see multi-factor authentication in practice. And that type of security should be layered onto CRM. You want to make sure that you protect your account information by making sure that you really lock down the identity security. And also with that is authorization. And that's the function of specifying access rights and privileges. So when you have multiple different users in the CRM system, it's really important that you follow the principle of less privilege. And you want to make sure that the accounts are only assigned privileges for what they need access to in a CRM system, and not to have access to more than what they need to do to fulfill their activities within the system. And then accounting, and that's the process of tracking users' activity. It's really important in a CRM system that you can log and audit the activities of an account in a CRM system. You want to do this for one, to make sure that people are only within the records and accounts that they should have access to. But in addition to that, it gives you a perspective on whether or not there could be cyber attacks in place. And if there are a cyber attack that had occurred, for you to able to trace the actions and identify what the issue was so you can address the root cause. In addition to that is to think about data security and protecting tables within the database. The CRM system has an underlying database, and it's important that those information is really locked down. And a specific security control that should be used for CRM systems is called data loss prevention, or commonly called DLP. And that is when the system is actively monitoring what type of information is being sent out of a system. So for example, in a CRM system, a data loss prevention rule could look for social security numbers and then trigger a warning or some indication of whether or not that type of specific information has left the system. And so that's something that should be tracked and audited and monitored. And those two aspects of the identity security and really controlling and having a specific lockdown of the accounts and how they log in, the types of information that they can access in a CRM system. And then on top of that, data security, that you have a mechanism that's really in place that observes and monitors the sensitive information that leaves the CRM system.
Great, thanks, Chris. And so we'll kind of explore maybe some of the liability issues and risk management here in a moment, picking up on that on the cybersecurity challenges. But Kimberly, going back to digital fundraising, this question about, where do organizations start, especially a small nonprofit. Much like the first question, where you're kind of giving, maybe your perspective on a priority place to start. Where for a small nonprofit that's just really trying to figure out digital fundraising, what might be some advice for them?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think a lot of smaller organizations are, asking themselves this question right now. So I think that's a great question. So I would say first, really try to determine what your goals are with digital fundraising. So are you trying to reach more younger donors? Are you looking to get more monthly donors? Do you want to reach new audiences kind of more broadly? Are you looking for higher event attendance, maybe to your fundraising events? Really, if that will help you figure out which direction to go and which platforms to prioritize based on your answers to those questions. So I always say start with your goals and then figure out who your audience is. Who are you trying to reach? Write down as much as you know about them. This can be a really fun kind of brainstorming session with your development team. Who are your donors? Who's your audience you're trying to reach? What's their age range? Are you trying to reach people who are just like your current donors? Are you trying to kind of expand your donor base? Knowing who you're trying to reach can really help you choose the right platforms. Even just within social media, for example, if most of your audience is over 50 and those are the folks you're trying to reach, Facebook is probably going to be a better choice for you than TikTok. But if you're trying to reach college students and get them engaged from, kind of a younger age, or have a mission where, you're really trying to engage college students to get some more grassroots donations, something even like TikTok could be a good fit, or Instagram. So you really want to think about, who you're trying to reach, because I know it can be really tempting, especially with social media, to say, let's just try all the platforms and see what works. But something that I think is really important is being realistic about capacity, and especially at a smaller organization, the odds that you have a full-time, digital fundraising person or social media manager or something like that are pretty small, right? So whoever is doing this work is probably doing a lot of other things too. And so you should be realistic about capacity. Know that email fundraising and social media fundraising and management do take time. So it's important to be realistic about that and to kind of figure out, who has room on their plates for that, or if you have the budget to hire someone else to manage it. And then you can kind of go over what I talked about earlier with optimizing your donation page and email fundraising and social media. But really look inward first, look inward in terms of your goals, in terms of your capacity. And then you can kind of start from a really a good place that is realistic, so that you're not, getting in over your head. But you certainly want to have a donation page. That's really important, to have a good donation page on your website, regardless of, how you end up driving traffic to that page, whether it's email or social media or something else. You want to have a really solid donation page on your website to drive people to, and then go from there. And I typically would say, most nonprofits, it makes more sense to start out with email than social media, just because they tend to have, better email lists, bigger email lists with better relationships with the people on their email lists than they do with social media. However, nothing is universally true. And if the opposite is true for your organization, then certainly you could start out with social media fundraising. But email, you often see a little bit of a better response rate and, higher open rates and things like that. So I would say start there, and then hopefully that will get you going in the right direction.
And Kimberly, for a small nonprofit that has no development staff, for example, and it might be the board of directors who might even be stepping in to provide more of that assistance, the email fundraising, that's a great opportunity to tie it directly to like an annual appeal, right? To really pick up on the messaging and make that connection.
Absolutely. And, I really encourage organizations who are looking at digital fundraising to think about how to integrate it with your existing fundraising, whatever that is. If that's direct mail, if that's a lot of events fundraising, think about how you can integrate, because the thing that will save you the most time, that will be the most efficient, is figuring out your overarching campaign message. Say it's your year-end appeal. So you have your message for your direct mail appeal, everything's written up, and you can adapt that, the copy even, for email and for social media, and take the images that, maybe if you used images in your direct mail piece, or that are on your website around the campaign and use those on social media and an email too. That will save a lot of time. You don't have to reinvent the wheel for every single element of this. You don't have to have a completely different message on social media, then email, then direct mail. And in fact, it's a lot better to reinforce your message across different channels and different platforms. And that will make it a lot more effective. So absolutely, I always recommend incorporating digital fundraising with direct mail campaigns.
So, and we'll we'll come back to kind of getting your perspective on a little bit more of the transition during the pandemic and kind of what insights you have to share and what you're seeing. But Chris, I think this question around legal liabilities related to cyber security issues for nonprofits is a big one, and then the secondary part about cyber insurance. I wonder if you could just give us your perspective on this area of liability, and I assume this is a big focus area. Why Tech Impact probably has a lot of nonprofits involved with your organization.
It is. We're thinking about we're really thinking about compliance here. And one way that I can boil this down with your legal liabilities is to think about the type of data that the organization collects. So there's within different industries, there are different industry regulations. And so if you're collecting medical information, you're going to be suspect to HIPAA and high trust. And that has to do with making sure that the patient's confidential information is protected. And similarly, for financial institutions or financial data is GLBA or Gramm-Leach-Riley Act, and that is protecting financial information such as tax ID, social security numbers, bank account information, credit card information, and protecting those types of stuff. And so it's really important to have an understanding of the actual data that's being collected and processed and stored by the organization. And that will determine what type of regulation that an organization must adhere to. But just at a very high level, that GLBA and HIPAA are the two larger regulations. One focusing on financial information and the financial sector, and then HIPAA and the second with medical information and the medical community. And then with cybersecurity, it's important to understand risk, that there's only three choices with risk. There's accepting risk, that's one option. There's mitigating risk, and then there's transferring risk. So the benefit to cyber insurance is that you are transferring the risk of a cyber attack to a third party. And so that is the advantage to cyber insurance. So that when there is a cyber attack that the organization falls victim to, that the costs of the cyber insurance could cover the remediation, the root cause analysis, and additional support getting to the remediation of the root cause. So that is some of the benefits besides just transferring risk. Do I recommend cyber insurance? I do, but it's important to understand exactly what cyber insurance is intended to do, and that's mitigating risk to a third party.
And I think that area of cyber insurance is definitely a big focus. I mean, I think for the New York Council of Nonprofits, we've heard a number of organizations really exploring the need for cyber insurance. So it seems to have taken on a lot more importance in terms of that point about mitigating the risk or transferring the risk in terms of that liability issue. And I think Chris, if you look at, I don't know if Tech Impact has been impacted by the issue around false unemployment claims, fraudulent unemployment claims, but I think about every single nonprofit I can think of seems to be dealing with that right now in terms of this huge uptick in fraudulent unemployment claims. So it just gets at that whole issue of data and how big a problem that is for not just the nonprofit sector, I would say.
And what point that I want to mention with cyber insurance, that cyber insurance is similar to life insurance in the respect that before you are get the policy that you are audited on your health. So before you get life insurance, you have to submit questionnaires, go through physicals before you get the life insurance. That's similar with cyber insurance, that there are questionnaires and most often auditing on your information systems that will evaluate the overall security and security posture of the organization before you get your cyber insurance. And of course, your rates will be tailored around the information that the insurance company collects from your questionnaire and ordering or your level of risk.
So definitely, I think for organizations that haven't looked into cyber insurance, it sounds like something definitely worth exploring with your general liability package in terms of your policy package. So it's that's great to bring that up. So I want to transition back to Kimberly and just have you touch on this area of digital fundraising in the in the era of COVID-19, the impact of pandemic, and kind of what maybe are you seeing, or some of the lessons that people have learned in terms of how we raise money when we can't bring people together for a special event, or kind of the way we have to rethink our fundraising.
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. And I know, especially earlier on in the pandemic, but I think throughout it, a lot of organizations were worried about asking for money, knowing that a lot of folks have been, negatively impacted, have had job loss and things like that. But I would encourage everyone to just continue your fundraising efforts, because the work you're doing is so important. And so I would just start by saying that please do continue your fundraising efforts. You might have to get a little more creative. If you're thinking kind of broadly about fundraising beyond digital fundraising, I would say think about what's worked in the past. And if whatever has worked in the past can continue to work, then certainly keep doing it. If you've had successful direct mail campaigns in the past and you continue to have the budget for that, continue doing direct mail. If you've had successful special events in the past, you obviously aren't going to be able to do the kinds of in-person events that you've done before. But a lot of organizations have gotten creative and thought about how to do digital events that include even, live auctions or silent auctions when, in the past they had those in person, those auctions in person. So that's certainly something that you can do at this point in the pandemic too. Donors are a little more experienced with that, a little more comfortable, and know what to expect. So if you, live stream an event on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube or kind of whatever platform you're using, there's not that same technology barrier that there was a year ago when we were just getting into this, and a lot of donors hadn't experienced that yet. But I would certainly say if you rely a lot on events, it's hard to recreate the exact feeling of, a gala, being in the room together, and having the silent auction and talking to friends and things like that. You can't recreate that exactly, but you can recreate an event online. And I've seen organizations get creative with, breakout groups and things like that. If talking to other people was an important part of a fundraising event, for example, that's certainly something you could try to make it a little more interactive than just, kind of the one-way live stream of an event where people can comment on it. But, that can be another way to engage people, is to have the people who are, talking about the event actually ask questions or encourage people to comment, to create that sense of community and that sense of engagement. It won't be the same, but you can certainly do some things like that. And I've seen organizations being really creative with it. I would also say, with the pandemic, be aware of what your donors are experiencing. They might be, stressed or fearful or kind of exhausted at this point in the pandemic. They may have experienced loss. So it is important to have that in mind as you're developing messaging around fundraising. Just be aware of the climate you're operating in. That doesn't mean you shouldn't send out an email fundraising appeal or a direct mail fundraising appeal, but just be aware of where your donors are as you're messaging. And that doesn't even necessarily mean you have to call that out directly. Like, you may be exhausted, but please give us money. You don't have to say that, but be aware of where they are when you're developing your message. And something else that's really important, I think, is a lot of organizations have heard from donors or are worried they might hear from donors that Donors are worried that the organization isn't doing well during the pandemic, or may not make it through the pandemic, or is suffering financially. So if it's true that you're doing okay during the pandemic and you're able to communicate that to donors, that can be important, especially to major donors. But also let all of your donors and prospective donors know how you've responded during the pandemic, and in terms of adding new programming digitally, or being innovative in other ways, and continuing to fulfill your mission in digital ways. That can really help people feel good about continuing to give to you online or otherwise during the pandemic. Just really communicating about the work you've been doing, the important work you've been doing. And then you can also, rely on email fundraising. And this is a good time to try social media fundraising if that's something you're interested in that you haven't done before. People are online a lot right now. They're online for work, they're online for school in a lot of places. They're online for the social events that they normally would have done in person. So this is a great time to start exploring digital fundraising. Try sending out a fundraising email. Try fundraising on whatever social media channels you're on, and see how it goes. So that's what I would say. And in the pandemic, it has created more opportunity for community online. So it's actually a good time to start with digital fundraising.
And we'll come back just to have you just kind of expand on your answer there with a little bit more of maybe your insight or suggestions around that personal touch. You're definitely touching on it right now, but we'll have you give a little bit more feedback on that last question under digital fundraising. But I think we just wanted to have Chris weigh in just on a similar question that Kimberly answered around just for a small nonprofit who is just trying to figure out how to address this area of cybersecurity, which can sound in many ways big and scary, I think, for an organization that is maybe has limited staff, doesn't, just like fund development or the this whole area of digital fundraising just doesn't have dedicated staff. Chris, any suggestions around how an organization can kind of start in addressing cybersecurity or find more information and resources?
Yes, and I'm going to answer this question 2 or 3 times. And so if you're a small nonprofit, like I said, with no dedicated IT staff, the number one security measure that an organization should do is turn on MFA. This is completely anecdotal, but as the security manager of a MSP, of course, I'm aware of all the security incidents that occur for quite a huge variety of different nonprofits. And the number one compromise that I see almost daily is unauthorized access, where a cyber attacker gets control of a user's account. And 99 out of 100 times, multi-factor authentication is not turned on for that account. And if you don't recall, I mentioned it earlier, multi-factor authentications, when you go to sign in to, say, Apple or your bank, and then after you put in your username and password, you then get a code on your phone, you have to put the code in. That's multi-factor authentication. And so the reason why it's so effective, and I want to drive this home, is that people always have weak passwords. We always will, because humans can only remember simple passwords. But by having the device that's also required to log in, that means the attacker must either get control of my device or compromise my device, which is incredibly hard. So to answer the question, where to start, if you're a small nonprofit, you're really not sure where to start with MFA. That is the best protection you have. It's not ultimate protection, but it's really going to address so many vulnerabilities. Another way to start is that the larger application providers or systems, for example, Google and Microsoft, they are starting to bake in security monitoring and controls. And what I mean by that is specifically Microsoft. Of course, they have within their environments different controls for protecting identity security and communication security and application security and device security. But what they have started to roll out this past year is a scorecard. So when I start talking about things like identity security in the Office 365 management portal, they actually have a scorecard and they rate your identity security. And in addition, they also provide recommendations and links. So for example, to make this hopefully tangible, if you do not have MFA turned on and Microsoft says you could have a better score by turning on MFA, they have a link that provides documentation on how to set up MFA and also where to configure MFA. So a lot of the larger providers are really trying to help out with layering controls within their own systems. Or I guess what I'm trying to explain is that the industry has realized that it's one thing to provide these security controls, but if the end user or organization doesn't know how to take advantage of them, that they're really not effective and they're pointless. And Google is doing the same thing. And so in Google and Microsoft, look for the scorecards because they will help you address in the least technical possible nature on how to determine what kind of security holes you may have and also how to address them. And then another way that I would answer this question is, to have an audit your information technology environment. Get a security risk assessment. So this way you're not guessing. You had a professional that laid out what your security gaps are and what the potential vulnerabilities are, and most often provide recommendations so that this is no longer clueless, and now you have a clear vantage point of what types of security gaps you have and exactly what types of things you need to do. And what's important with that is then you can also start to identify what types of security controls not only are necessary, but what are cost effective. Because you will find out that many security controls that could be put in place have a $0 value, that there's no cost to implement them. They just need to be simply either turned on or reconfigured. So I guess to reiterate or sum up, if you're really clueless and in the dark, turn on MFA. My second recommendation is to really are now providing for the end user that anyone could take advantage of. And then thirdly is to get a professional assessment so that you have a clear understanding.
Those are great suggestions. And Chris, somebody had weighed in on the chat and just said they agree about their local MSP and agree to turn on MFA when possible. So there's some reinforcement. So Kimberly, I think we'll move to the last question, and then we'll have you touch just briefly on donor management systems. But any feedback on kind of that personal touch through digital platforms, and any advice you want to give on that?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So I would say there are a lot of ways to kind of be a little more personalized on digital platforms. With emails, you can personalize your emails by merging donors' names into the subject line or the body of the email. For example, in your email, you say, "Dear Mary," or further down, you can say something like, "Mary, can you donate $150 today?" You can even, you can merge in other information if that's relevant too, to make it feel a little more customized. So that's one thing you can do in email. Another thing you can do is segment your email list so that major donors or volunteers aren't getting the same emails as someone who's never donated or volunteered before. And so what I mean by segment your email list is create segments, like people on your groups on your email list that have something in common, for example, major donors, and create a message specifically for your major donors. So You can use similar messages for major donors and volunteers and other donors, kind of however you want to segment it. But you can, for example, customize the first paragraph a little more and say something like, as a major donor, you've provided, such necessary funds over the past year, whatever you want to say, and just acknowledge that this person is a major donor, and that makes it a little more personalized. Or, if it's a volunteer, say, as a volunteer, you've given your time, now we're asking you to, give a donation to, something like that. And then that acknowledges that that person already has a relationship with your organization, that you value that relationship, that you're not just sending them a generic email that somebody who's never donated before is getting. So that can be a really effective way to do it too. And then you can message directly to those various segments. So on social media, some things you can do, you can make sure you respond to comments. So if somebody comments on your post, you can write out a direct response, or if it doesn't require a response, you can at least, like it or something to acknowledge that you've seen it. And not only does that feel good for that person who commented, it makes them feel heard and like you care about their feedback and you care that they're engaged, but it also looks good for other people who see that your organization is engaging with its, with its donors or supporters. The same is true with direct messages on social media. Make sure you're responding to those in a timely manner. Some people, may have a question about, what the fundraising campaign is about or how to donate or something like that. That's really important. So I would say when you're on social media, stay on top of those things, stay on top of your messages and comments. And then another thing you can do that is kind of taking it to the next level on social media is if you're advertising on social media, you can target specific lists. So for example, if you wanted to target your volunteers or your LiveBunt donors or something like that, you could upload that list and Facebook would target those folks who are on that list with a specific ad that you create. So whether or not you want to call out the fact that somebody's a major donor in an ad, that might feel kind of weird, but you probably want a slightly different message for major donors than LiveBunt donors who, are lapsed and you don't know if they're going to give again. So that can be another way to make it feel a little more personalized, like you're actually talking to, the person in their relationship with your organization.
So Kimberly, I'm just asking people to share any additional questions in the chat as we kind of wrap up. But do you want to? We had a number of questions pre-submitted around DMS, and I know that's a whole different world in terms of so much out there. But do you want to just talk a little bit about some of the advice you can give, and more specifically one of the resources available that we have linked that I'll highlight in a minute here?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, and one of the questions I saw asked about, there's so many things like donor software and foundation searches. How do you choose where to spend your money? And so I would say, start with your goals again and your budget and look at historic fundraising and where your gifts come from. And that can help you be a good place to start identifying areas for growth. Do you want to focus on individual donor fundraising, major gifts, foundations, events? That kind of answer will help you determine where to invest and which of those kind of many resources you could invest in. But if you're trying to fundraise from individuals, which most organizations are, you definitely want a way to accept donations online and to manage donor data. And that's where the DMS question really comes into play. So I would like to refer you to a resource that I think is really great. So Tech Impact has a guide to low-cost fundraising software. It was put out in September of last year, so it's really up to date. And that's a really great place to start and kind of help you figure out what you need. It has information about DMS platforms, about CRMs, about different fundraising platforms. And it's a pretty lengthy guide that will help you kind of figure out, okay, where do I even start with this? And, which of these are actually affordable on my budget? And there are a lot of different costs. And I wish I could say, this is the best DMS platform and you should absolutely go with this individual one. It's universally good for everyone. But really the truth is it depends on what your organization needs, which DMS is going to be the right fit for you, and also on your budget. So that's why I think this guide is a really great place to start. I mean, there are so many DMS platforms out there. There's Keela and Bloomerang and Kindful and Little Green Light. There are just dozens out there. And the cost range and the features range is pretty broad. But I would say, look at your budget and then use this guide to kind of help get you started. And then one thing I would really emphasize is make sure whatever platform you choose, if you're just getting started with one, make sure you look at things like tech support and make sure that's actually available, because something that can happen with some really low cost platforms in general and or no cost platforms is that you lose some of the benefits that you get with some other ones. But one really important benefit is tech support. If you have a problem with an upload, or if you can't figure out how to do something, or if, for whatever reason, the DMS isn't doing what it's supposed to do and isn't giving you the report you need, even though it worked yesterday, you really want to have a human being who you can talk to, ideally on the phone, at least, through email or chat, who can help you solve that problem. So I think that's really important. And again, that's the guide to low cost fundraising software is where I'd really recommend getting started.
And we have these resources here, but I actually am also sharing the direct link again in the chat that is directly available here in these slides. So just in case people are looking to pull that resource up right now, you can click on the link I just shared with everyone in the chat. And so we have a couple other resources listed here, including the Technology and Learning Center that Tech Impact offers. And I think I'm just going to go back one slide here. And we did have one question come in, and I think Katie's just relating that they're migrating to several new systems. Any best practices you can recommend in handling the migration process? So Chris, did you want to weigh in on that?
Huge question. Verify your new systems. It's one thing to, when you recreate your new systems, to layer on your configurations and do that, but make sure that you really audit it. So for your new systems, do vulnerability scans, penetration testing against it, that you really need to audit your own configuration.
I have a couple of things I would add to from kind of a non-super tech expert perspective too, for that side of things. Don't be afraid to ask questions, especially if you are getting help with the migration from whatever system you're migrating to. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Make sure that everything is lined up properly. I've worked at organizations where, before I started there, they moved to a new DMS and the fields weren't lined up properly. I don't know, they weren't pointing to the right place. And so the data was just very messy and it required a lot of manual fixing. So I would also ask questions around what happens if there is a mistake when it depends on which systems you're talking about too, but when we're migrating data, if there's a mistake, will you help us fix it? Will you go in and fix that and make sure it works really well? So don't be afraid to ask questions, even if you feel like they're, silly questions that you're asking a technical person. You really want to make sure that they are thinking, whoever is helping you with this process is thinking through everything and has a plan in place to make sure everything is migrated properly too.
Great. So I'm just again, just if anyone has a question, feel free to put in the chat. But as we wrap up here, as I mentioned earlier, we just wanted to highlight the opportunity for nonprofit organizations located in the Hudson Valley, and more specifically, that includes, of course, Westchester and Putnam counties. There is an opportunity to make a request for 1 free hour, or free technical assistance, 1 hour with a tech impact expert. And for example, Kimberly Sandberg is our digital fundraising tech impact expert who's been taking some of these inquiries. And so, it's a great opportunity if you were looking to have a follow-up discussion, get a little more detail or guidance from Tech Impact. This is something that we're able to provide with support through the Hudson Valley Funders Network. And I think we've had a number of nonprofits in Hudson Valley take advantage of it. And we would encourage, anyone who's interested that is looking maybe for a little more detail or hand-holding, that with limitations within 1 hour, of course, this is a great opportunity to take advantage of. So we're, again, I'll try to copy the direct form into the chat here in a moment. And it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So I think, Chris, Kimberly, any closing comments before we hand it back over to Tom?
I would say just thanks everyone for being here and for asking good questions. And yes, if you're interested, I've had some really good conversations with folks in those one-on-one sessions that Andrew mentioned. We've done some kind of live website audits. We've talked about digital fundraising. People have sent me emails to look at and talk through together. So if you think something like that would be helpful, I would definitely encourage you to sign up.
Thanks, and I appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you.
And I just shared the direct link in the chat here. So if anyone is interested in making that request, and again, just with the understanding that it is limited to nonprofit organizations in the Hudson Valley region. So, but yeah, please take advantage of that opportunity. We thank you all for coming today, and thank you to Chris and Kimberly for sharing their expertise. And Tom, thank you very much for having us involved, and we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrew, Chris, Kimberly did a fantastic job. So much to take away as nonprofit organizations, so many things to think about. And the most important thing there is the 1 hour free consult, right? There's no excuse, right? Nonprofits should be reaching out and asking for help and trying to learn more and do better. So thank you again. Thank you everybody for being a part of day 4 of the Nonprofit Leadership Summit. That concludes the program for today. We hope you'll join us tomorrow morning, bright and early, 9 a.m. for the outgoing CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, Wes Moore, who will talk about society at a tipping point as it relates to race and going forward. And then afterwards, there'll be a breakout session for people to debrief and discuss what Wes has to say. So thank you again, everybody. Take care and stay safe out there.